Vauban. C tier. He's good, but there are better frames.
Vauban will be placed into the unranked tier as I again just do not know enough about him to accurately place him. A very uneducated ranking though from me would place him in the high C tier or low B tier.
Vauban, who is a Warframe that is supremely disappointing.
The kicker, the thing I've not been able to get over, is the fact that another actual human, being dead serious, would argue that Vauban was not only viable but quite strong because he gets a 0.25 multiplier against impeded targets. Yeah right, my fault. He's clearly broken.
It's just that it seems sort of like a strange knockoff version of Hydra. Crowd controlling, damage dealing,
Vauban to get better anytime soon, and all he really has to his name is half of an ability. Every single form of Minelayer is also bad.
AOE CC, but doesn't work in Overguard. Has an enemy limit on Bastille, which is still ridiculous. And he's testing the versus.
Fine, I'll do it myself. Hello everyone, I'm Professor Dystopia, and I would like to introduce myself before I get started on this guide. I have over 6,000 hours on Warframe, and I have been playing Warframe since October of 2014, and that's a really fucking long time. But regardless of that, I still enjoy the game to this day. Its constant updates, its great story, and its gameplay just attract me in such a way that I just can't let go of it. Even when I take breaks, I still end up coming back. And after some time, I personally just want to start making some guides because I know a lot about the game and I just want to teach people how the game functions and how to play it. But with all that out of the way, I'd like to state that I will go more in depth into this at the end of the video. And also, for the person that commented on the previous video, the fashion for the Vauban will be at the end of the video as well. I will also be including timestamps in the description because not everyone wants to watch how a Warframe functions. They just want to go straight to the builds. And if y'all could, I'd appreciate it if y'all subscribed, liked, hit the bell, comment, whatever. You know the whole lingo, you know all the gist of how that works. Everybody reminds you. But now with all the introductions and statements out of the way, welcome to the guide about Vauban by a Vauban main. Now, I have been playing Vauban for a really long time in Warframe. I have over 25% of that time being played as Vauban. Over the years, I've taken all the knowledge that I could of the game and all the resources that it's given me to try and help improve Vauban to make him a more viable candidate for late game, mid game, all the game modes, everything all around. Vauban, in my eyes, is one of the funnest Warframes you can play in Warframe. He controls the battlefield, and you're able to set your abilities wherever you want and go about and just be in multiple places at once. It takes some thinking to be able to know what you're doing with Vauban, and I enjoy doing that because it's almost like playing like a tactician. And I personally feel that Vauban is very underrated as it currently stands. A lot of people rate him C tier or lower, some B tier. There's some people that do know about Vauban, and they know how he functions and everything, and do give him a good rating. But with all the ratings and all the tiers and everything like that, I honestly think tier lists are not a very fair way to show how good a Warframe can be. And it feels very unjustified that he gets a C tier rating, especially whenever people put him at C tier and don't even give him 5 seconds to explain why they're putting him at C tier. I personally believe that every Warframe in the game has viability and potential to be S tier all around. Even the old Hydroid, before his rework, he still had purpose and he still had functions that other Warframes didn't quite do. So with Vauban, I feel like a lot of people just don't understand how he functions and how he works and how people should play. So I want to teach people and tell people and also show people what you can do with Vauban. I am personally not trying to target anyone or cause any problems. I'm personally just a small voice. I'm not trying to start fights or any drama of any kind. I just want to show people that there's a lot of available information out there that can help you make whatever Warframe you want to be an absolute monster. I just want to make sure that there is no misinformation of a Warframe out there. And over the past few years for Warframe, we have had a lot of changes. We've had shield changes, we've had companion changes, mod balance changes, elemental status changes. The game has been evolving since then. And with all those changes, I personally feel that Vauban has kind of just been left in the corner and ignored by a lot of people, and they just haven't given him the light of day or given him any builds for anybody to work with. It also doesn't help that Vitalius is gone. Sorry if I butchered the name, I just don't know how to pronounce it. But with all that being said, I am also a Vauban main myself. I've worked with the Warframe for years, molding it and changing his capabilities over time, understanding how I can manipulate his abilities the best way possible. I've learned lots of stuff about Vauban that isn't quite mentioned anywhere else. And to get this guide started, I want to go over Vauban's passive, his abilities, and some tips and tricks along the way, because there is a lot to know about Vauban. So the passive sounds pretty basic. It's 25% damage increase against enemies that are affected by CC. That doesn't sound like a very large number for a Warframe to be given. But the thing is, the game doesn't tell you what kind of damage it's giving you. This 25% damage bonus is a multiplicative addition to your final damage number. That means if you're dealing 1,000,000 damage with a gun on another Warframe, you are dealing 1,250,000 damage with Vauban. And all you need to do is have an enemy CC'd. And you don't have to be the source of the CC either. Your teammates can, the environment, they're on the ground, they're slowed. Any form of CC counts toward this bonus. So in addition to Bane mods giving you a double dip of damage with your dots, such as electrical procs or slash procs, Vauban is also giving you another additive multiplier to that Bane mod bonus. You are dealing more damage with dot builds with Vauban just because enemies are CC'd. That's really good. And there's a lot of people that just don't understand how good of a bonus this is. Now let's go ahead and get started with the abilities. Hey, future Professor Dystopia here. So I may have done a little bit of a mistake. Instead of saying Tesla Nervos, I say Tesla Servos. Be aware of this. I'm very sorry. I have been saying servos for years now. Here's the dictionary definition for both words, and they both make sense. And from what you can tell from the descriptions, you can definitely tell that servos seems to be a very accurate description compared to Nervos, even though Nervos is more of an action description and servos is more of a description of what the ability looks like. So, sorry, it's Nervos, not servos. Vauban's first ability is Tesla Servos. Tesla Servos allows you to throw up to 4 Tesla balls when you fully charge the ability, and these balls go out and seek enemies and attach to them. Once the servo is attached to an enemy, it will explode in a small AoE, an electric status proc on all enemies in the area. Guaranteed. Each servo has up to 10 charges to shock all enemies in the area, and they have no set duration and will follow you around if there's no enemies to seek out. This ability is a really good option for just basic throw and forget CC. Nothing much you have to worry about it. Once it's on the ground, it goes and does its own thing, and you can pretty much spot whenever somebody is having a shock attack. Now, the augment for Tesla servos is Tesla Bank. Tesla Bank allows you to store any damage that you deal onto an enemy that has a Tesla servo attached to them. That stored up damage is then later exploded in an AoE around it after the enemy is killed. You can get some pretty nutty numbers with this, but the thing is that it's not very good against armor, being primarily just electric damage. So I very much recommend shredding armor and going for headshots on this one so that you can get the most out of this augment. And another cool thing about this ability is that you can still move around while charging or casting the ability. You can also still shoot and reload so long as you are not charging the servos. I also have Tesla servos as my personal choice to swap out for different abilities with the helmet system. And Tesla servos is also the ability the helmet system takes from Vauban to be able to give to other Warframes. This allows you to also use Tesla Bank on other Warframes. Now, Vauban's second ability is Minelayer. This ability functions similarly to Ivar's Quiver, if you know how that functions. Basically, you have 4 abilities, and if you press the ability button, it cycles through each ability. To be able to cast your choice, you have to hold down the ability button. Once you do that, the ability is deployed there for a set duration based upon which one you're choosing. You can also have up to 4 copies of each of these mines out at once. Once you recast a new copy, the first copy is gone. Each individual cast has its own timer, but you're only able to see the timer of the last ability you casted. Also, there is no augment for this ability, and there is a lot of information about this ability, so buckle up. Now, the first choice is Tether Coil. This mine seeks out up to 2 enemies at a specific range, grabs them, ragdoll them, and brings them towards its center. Now, this mine is not the best. It's kind of redundant because Vortex exists and it's not that strong of a grab in the end. But there is one thing you can do with it. If you ever find yourself in a sticky situation or low on energy and having to decide between a Bastille or a Vortex, you can always throw Tether Coil inside a Bastille. Tether Coil will then seek out, grab the enemies, drag them towards its center, and then let go of the enemies and allow the Bastille to latch onto them. After that, it will then go and seek out more enemies to bring in and wait until there's room in the Bastille. Now, this is relatively cool, but not really necessary. Now, the second choice is Flechette Orb. This mine is the best mine out of the 4 choices. It's basically an automatic turret that will shoot any enemies that come close to it. It strictly deals scaling puncture damage. Now, what scaling means is that the damage that this ability does will keep scaling with the enemy's level. So, no matter how high the enemy's level gets, Flechette Orb will still be dealing a lot of damage. Flechette Orb has a 50% crit chance and a 2 times crit damage multiplier on it. Now, don't forget, you can have up to 4 instances of this ability out at once. So you can throw it in a corner, throw it in a checkpoint, and you forget about it, and it can kill stuff on its own. It's that good of an ability. It also damages nullifier bubbles too. Damaging nullifier bubbles with Warframe abilities is kind of rare. There are some that can do it, and there's quite a few that do it very well. But Vauban is one of those that doesn't have to worry about nullifiers compared to other Warframes. And at the very end of its duration, it will fire a massive burst of shots around it. This part doesn't quite come into play because you're moving around a lot, repositioning, throwing new ones into new positions because you're trying to get any new enemies that are coming at you. But it's good to know whenever the duration is gone, it will basically shotgun all around it. Now, a really cool thing that Flechette Orb is capable of doing is that it can take weapon buffs and Warframe buffs. For example, the Mutilus Quanta, its little infested bubble, can give it electrical damage, higher crit chance, a bit more, damage in general. It's really nice, but it's really finicky to try and work with that. I've also discovered it works with Nourish. This means you now have an automatic turret that deals puncture damage and viral damage that can also deal viral status procs that scales. This ability combined with Nourish is really strong. But not only that, it isn't the only ability that is affected in such a way. That I will tell you later. Now, the third choice is Vector Pad. God, I wish this were better. Look, it speeds up pacifism defect, and it really doesn't do much of anything else. It's kind of just there. You get to have a little bit of fun. You get to launch enemies in random directions or whatever. It's like, it's an F-Zero speed boost pad, basically. It'll get you going somewhere instantly, and that's about it. Please bring back Bounce Pad. That unironically served a way better purpose, especially in interception missions. Now the last choice is Overdriver. Overdriver is basically a buff you can apply to yourself and your teammates and your allies and your companions as well, a small damage boost. This small damage boost works as a mini serration. It's not spectacular. Your passive does the damage increase for you that you need, but you know, if you ever see a Mesa kind of just standing around doing its own thing, shooting enemies, you can always just toss one on her. She won't notice, but you know, you're helping. And one thing to make note of about Minelayer is that you can move around while casting this ability and any of its choices, but you can't shoot or reload while casting any of the choices. Now, Vauban's third choice is Photon Strike. Photon Strike is actually a really cool ability. A lot of people disregard this because it deals blast damage. Blast damage isn't that great of a damage type to be using against any kind of armor. It has some major negatives and downsides towards it. But Photon Strike does have one thing about it. It deals scaling damage as well, similar to Flechette Orb. The only thing you need to do is strip armor. And with the amount of utility and options we have in Warframe, it's super easy to do. Now, once you throw it, it does take a second to fire, and it has a very minimal range to it. It doesn't scale very well with range, but there is something that helps this. Vortex automatically attracts Photon Strike towards it. Do keep that in mind, because it can get kind of annoying if you wanted to just Photon Strike directly in front of you, and it suddenly starts flying in the complete opposite direction, and the enemies just look at you and laugh. And this ability does come with an augment. The augment is Photon Repeater. How Photon Repeater functions, you have to hit 5 enemies with 1 strike. After that, you get a nice little buff, and the very next cast of the ability is free, and it fires an additional shot with it. This augment is fun to use. It's not mandatory. It's not incredibly broken or anything like that, but it's a nice addition if you're wanting to somewhat go for a Photon Strike build. And another thing to make note of is that you can shoot, reload, and move around while casting this ability. Now for the final ability, the fourth ability, his bread and butter, his dopamine making machine, Bastille and Vortex. Let's go ahead and talk about the first half first. Whenever you throw out a Bastille in a specific range, you will be able to suspend enemies in the air, and they will be unable to act, move, or do anything. Their armor, if they have armor, will slowly be stripped from them per second by a certain percentage. This armor will also be transferred to you and any allies within the Bastille up to a bonus of 1,000 armor. This passive bonus lasts 1-to-1 with your duration. So if you're at 200% duration, you get 20 seconds of 1,000 free armor. That's just as long as an Arcane Guardian. So you're basically giving yourself and your team a free Arcane Guardian so long as people stand in the Bastille. And so long as you're standing in the Bastille, that bonus is forever. Now, there are a couple downsides to Bastille. A lot of people mention this, but Bastille has a limited amount of enemies it can hold. I know this sucks. In a horde shooter game, you really want to be able to get everyone all at once and not have to worry about them. But here's the really cool thing about Bastille. You are not limited to how many you can have out on the field. The only thing limiting you is the amount of energy you have and how long your Bastilles last. The fact that people complain that it doesn't grab enough enemies is absolutely ridiculous to me. Another thing to make note of for Bastille as well is that if any new enemies enter the radius of Bastille while it's at full capacity, they will not have their armor stripped and they will not be suspended. So you should be killing the people that are being held up by Bastille. That makes room, that allows them to be picked up, and that allows their armor to start being stripped. Bastille being a continuous armor strip ability is really strong. But do also make note how Bastille works with Eximus units. Eximus units, so long as they have Overguard, they will not be picked up. But if there is room in the Bastille, which if you have multiple Bastilles on the field, or there happens to be some room still left in the Bastille, their armor will be stripped at the same rate that everybody that gets picked up is. Then towards the end duration of Bastille, it will, for the very last few seconds, transform itself into a vortex. So any enemies that you weren't seeing or weren't paying attention to that were being held up by Bastille and were armor stripped are now brought up into a nice, good center for you to just destroy. I find Bastille to be such a cool ability because you are basically a mobile fortress and you can build your fort wherever you want. Yes, it doesn't block bullets, but you get more armor and you take people's armor and you can throw it wherever you want. Now let's go over the second half of Vortex. The main thing a lot of people know Vauban for. Vortex has the same exact range your Bastille does. And to be able to cast Vortex, you hold the ability button down. Do make note as well, if you have any Bastilles out and active, if you hold down the ability button, you will not be casting a Vortex. You will instead be transforming all existing Bastilles into vortexes. This also resets the duration timer on them completely. So if your Bastille was down to 8 seconds and you refresh it, it's back up to its cap amount. Now Vortex itself pulls enemies towards its center very quickly. It also continuously deals damage to any enemies being pulled. This allows you, and only you, to see if there's any enemies stuck on walls and to go over and finish them off, because they're not going to be getting themselves attracted towards the vortex unless you put enough vortexes down in one spot. The more vortexes you have, the stronger the pull, the more dot numbers you see coming off of enemies. Now with Vortex, it deals strictly magnetic damage. It also deals magnetic procs and will bring all loot items towards its center so long as the loot items are able to get to the center. Vortex itself makes a shit ton of dopamine for you. You have a giant ball of enemies you can kill. You can melee them, you can shoot them, you can blow them up, you can do whatever you want. They're not doing anything and you get to see the happy numbers all the time. Vortex can also affect Eximus units and elite enemy units such as Acolytes and Void Rigs. It doesn't necessarily pull them closer towards its center, but if any of those enemies get within the range, they will be slowed by a large margin. From what I can tell, percentage-wise, it's between a 50% slow and a 70% slow. Now, one really cool thing about Vortex that a lot of people don't know or mention is that it also gets affected by weapon and Warframe abilities, just like Flechette. This means you can cast Nourish on your Vortex. It deals slightly a little bit more damage, nothing big, but it has a chance to also give you a viral proc. And a lot of people don't know this or don't share this information. But now let's get to the augment of Bastille and Vortex. This is a combined augment because previously, back in the day, Vortex and Bastille were two separate abilities. Repelling at Bastille affects both sides of the ability. Bastille, whenever it gains max capacity, it then has the ability to launch enemies that enter its radius away from it, ragdolling them a short distance away and being a pretty good area denial tool in general. Now for the Vortex side of the augment, whenever you throw down one Vortex, you can keep throwing Vortexes into that single Vortex, increasing its duration timer up to a cap. This cap is based on your duration. If you have one continuity on your Vauban, this duration is 3 minutes at cap. You can also move, shoot, and reload while casting either version of this ability. That's it for all the abilities. If you couldn't tell, you can move while casting every single one of these abilities. This alone makes Vauban a very mobile frame compared to other Warframes. There are very few Warframes that have the capability of moving and casting every single one of their abilities. This allows Vauban to be a very mobile frame, constantly dodging and moving around. And also, your third and fourth abilities get a unique throwing animation while you're in the air. If you have enough energy and enough casting speed, you can, in theory, fly and be an AC 130 the whole time. But that's it. That's Vauban. That's all of his abilities. That's his passive. That's his entire kit. That's how he works. He is very fun to play because you have to decide where your stuff needs to go, how to use them, watch for the timers, prepare for whatever's coming. It's all just tactics and planning and setting up traps for your enemies to come and fall into, which, by the way, his original intention and design was to be a trap master. not an engineer. But I still like him as an engineer. He's pretty damn cool as an engineer. Now let's get into the good part, the builds. The builds are going to be nice and explained. They'll be nice and detailed. I'll show you some gameplay while the build is being shown as well, so you get a general idea of what it looks like and what you can do. Let's start off with the early game builds. I have 2 builds here for you. Now, there is a catch for Vauban in the early game. First off, I don't recommend getting him in the early game. Reason being is that he costs 75 Nora credits in the Nightwave shop to be able to get his pieces. That is kind of expensive. Also, to get the Prime, you need to get a lot of Netana extract as well, and that also costs Nora credits. But if you do ever find yourself in the situation where you're in the early game and you can build Vauban, or you want Vauban, or you've been gifted Vauban, I have these 2 builds here. One has an Orcan Catalyst, the other one doesn't. Also, both these builds take no Forma. Do ignore the polarities I have on my Vauban. And this Vauban right here is my original first Vauban. But Vauban comes with a dash polarity in his aura slot. So corrosive protection, energy siphon, any dash polarity you can get your hands on, slap it on there. That'll give you the mod capacity to be able to go with any of these builds. Vauban also comes with a V and a dash polarity in his mod slots. So that has been taken into account as well for both builds here. Just remember, with an Orcan reactor, without an Orcan reactor. And a lot of these mods you will also get while you're completing the star chart. Now, the mid-game build. This build basis is basically meant for before New War. You're also able to build this out however you want. What I'm currently showing you is fairly standard. This will allow you to survive, do any mission, do whatever you want with Vauban. But the really cool thing about Vauban is that he is very changeable depending on what mission type you want to do. You're going into an interception mission, build more range, minimal power, some good duration, a little bit of efficiency, and repelling Bastille. That mission's going to be a cakewalk. Same thing goes for mobile defense, and maybe defense, but don't recommend it there. It'll kind of slow down the mission. Vortex is probably the more preferable mode right there. Going into exterminate missions, low duration with a high range will allow you to basically suck up all enemies very quickly and let that vortex disappear so that you can still go and get the other enemies without bothering the rest of your team. You're doing a survival, duration, range, power, strength. You want that armor up. You want those flechette orbs up and killing enemies. You want to constantly be able to keep your abilities up and build your own fort and fortification. But not only that, Vauban's capabilities have drastically increased because of all the companion changes we've had. Having healing, energy uptime, status procs, even additional stats towards your weapons, a lot of Warframes have actually just absolutely blown up in the mid game. And Vauban is one of them. So just be creative. Vauban is one of those few frames that benefits from every single stat you throw on him. He's greedy for every single one at the same time. So let's get on to the really good part, the late game builds. A lot of you have already beaten New War and such like that. So this is primarily focusing in that section, and it's going to be my main focus as well. Now there are some things I want to make note of. One, I do have Energize. It is not 100% needed. Equilibrium and companion changes have drastically changed the energy meta. Hell, there's so many options now that Energize is kind of a joke. It's so overused and really not needed most of the time anymore. Number 2, I have Prime Surefooted. Yes, I know, Prime Surefooted. Oh my god, somebody else that has Prime Surefooted and is recommending it in the builds. Look, it's really good, okay? When you get it, you will see why it's really good. But don't forget, there are options. You can put regular Surefooted on with Fortitude. That gives you the same benefit, but it does cost 2 mod slots. There's also Handspring. I used Handspring so much back in the day. Handspring was the best mod to go for dealing with CC all the time. Hell, I even did the stupid decision of picking Prime Surefooted second. I got Primed Shred first. Number 3, yes, I have a lot of maxed out mods. Don't worry about this. Seriously. You will get all the endo, you will max out the mods whenever you need to. That will all come in time. You can also use regular versions or swap some things around and see what fits best. I'm just making these as guidelines for you to be able to follow and use however you want. Number 4, forma your Vauban how you want. Yes, I put 2 Umbral Forma on mine. No, I do not regret it one bit. I also have an Aura Forma on mine as well. Do make note, all the builds I'm about to show you fit very well with this Forma format I have on my Vauban. Number 5, I have 5 red Tau Forge shards on my Vauban. I have 3 for plus 45% more duration and 2 for plus 30% more power. Regular ones can work just fine. How I have my shards is just my personal preference. But now, with all that out of the way, let's get into the builds. Now the first build I have to show you is the Umbran build. This build started out as a joke. I wanted to put Umbral Forma on my Vauban because I really liked playing Vauban all the time. Then I realized all 3 of them heavily benefit Vauban in general. More health, more tankiness, and more power strength is always welcome on Vauban. I swapped out Tesla servos for pillage, giving me a nice way to regain my shields, strip armor faster in addition to my Bastille, and also clear status effects. With the amount of power strength I get for this build at 200%, if you have Bastille down and grab a bunch of enemies, you cast pillage once, they will be fully stripped. It's really nice to have. It's also a really good survival tool to have as well. Equilibrium is on here for my energy supply with companion of choice, and adaptation is there for that little extra leverage as well. The aura mod can be whatever you want. I just put enemy radar on because it's my default go-to whatever I want. Corrosive projection is probably the better choice because then you're just stripping armor even faster, especially with your Bastille. Whenever you're at 200% power strength, you are stripping 20% armor per second. And because of the Umbral set, the default armor value of this build will be able to proc Incarnon weapon perks for you without needing to get your armor bonus that Bastille gives you. So any of the weapons that give additional punch through based on armor, Vauban loves those. And then this is the build where I have Energize. Energize can be replaced with whatever you want. Energize is not needed for this build. A good alternative would probably be Arcane Steadfast, because a 20% chance for 3 free ability casts is really good and very welcome. Now this is the second build. This is Gateban. Vauban really enjoys the new shield changes and can very much abuse them. He's one of the few Warframes that can fit fast deflection and vigilante vigor into his build and not have to sacrifice very much for survivability. This in combination with catalyzing shields is crazy good. Catalyzing shields, shrinking down your shields to a much smaller amount, but setting your shield gate amount to 1.3 seconds is pretty damn good. And having fast deflection and vigilante vigor together combined makes your shield recharge 0.2 seconds. This also means so long as you're moving, which Vauban does very easily since he doesn't need to stand still casting his abilities, resets the shield gate for you. You get 1.3 second shield gate no matter how many shields you get back, because catalyzing shields sets your amount to 1.3 seconds. You are in theory invincible so long as you're moving. But this build also has Arcane Aegis. Arcane Aegis, once it's procced, gives you 12 whole seconds of invincibility. So this build, combined with Vauban's spammy nature, allows you to set up your abilities, not caring about any enemies coming at you, and not having to worry about dying very easily. Do be wary though, it is a very active build. It can be a little tiring to play at times. The energy sustain is really easy to manage as well. You have Nourish, Equilibrium, and whatever companion of choice you want to use. Nourish and Equilibrium alone keep your energy up crazy amounts. And because you have Nourish on this build, your Flechette Orbs deal more damage, and your Vortexes apply viral. I also have Arcane Blessing on this build, because sometimes I get lazy, and I stop for a little bit too long and end up getting killed. So having Arcane Blessing as a little safety net is nice to have, but you can put whatever you want on there if you're a very active playstyle kind of person. Now for the less sweaty version of the Gateban build, Casualban. This build also uses some of the new shield changes. With the high shields, the high health, adaptation, armor, Arcane Aegis, you really don't have to worry about anything. You are so tanky and so capable of surviving anything coming at you, it's not even funny. Vauban can be a really tanky frame so long as you have him built right, and this build works really well for that. Now, I do have Condemn on here because I wanted to try something else other than Pillage, and Condemn has proved to be a very good ability to put on Vauban. One, when you're casting it, you can still shoot and reload and move around, so it doesn't take away your movement. You regain your shields And you CC your enemies, so your passive can take advantage of that. But do make note how Condemn works with Vauban. Condemned enemies cannot be picked up by Bastille or have their armor stripped, so long as they are condemned to the ground. But Vortex can still bring them together. You can also condemn enemies picked up by Bastille, but they will not move towards any Vortex. They are stuck in the air. And lastly, you can condemn enemies in your Vortex. So do be aware how Condemn works with Vauban. It's finicky at times, but with these 3 tips, you'll have the knowledge of how to properly use Condemn on him. His build has great efficiency. It has enough range with stretch to make your abilities feel good. You have a good chunk of power strength for your Bastille and Flechette Orb, and equilibrium for your energy gain. The really cool thing about this ability is that it's very low energy maintenance to keep yourself alive. And whenever your hands are getting a little tired, it doesn't hurt to play something a little bit easier. Now for the 4th build, I have Vortexban. Vortexban is a build that everybody is already familiar with. He is primarily used in Sanctuary Onslaught or any defense to be able to level up weapons, that kind of deal. This build is still a good build to use. I recommend using it because it's nice to just have something very easy to use to level up your weapons. You swap out Photon Strike with Spectra Rage, and you slap on the Augment Spectra Siphon. Any enemies that are sucked up into your Vortex drop energy orbs like crazy. You give yourself a lot of energy, you give your team a lot of energy. It's great to use. I've got Molt Efficiency and Molt Augmented here for some extra stats, which is always nice to have because there really isn't anything better to put on, but everybody has their preferences, so if you find something better, put that on and use that. Now the 5th build here is Gloomban. I had to make a Gloom build, at least once for Vauban. Okay? It is the meme ability to put on any Warframe to make it a super easy time no matter what. It's there to solely make the game easy. And that's not a bad thing. It is a very strong ability. You do have to build into it for it to function properly though. And this build uses it properly. It has enough range, it has the right power strength you need, it slows enemies down almost to a halt once you get your power strength stacked up. And Tesla servos can keep the enemies locked into an animation stun because they're slowed. They're not going to be moving anytime soon, and if they're stunned, they're basically just frozen. You also have Vortex, which doesn't get affected by the slow when you're pulling enemies in, so you don't have to worry about a bunch of slow enemies like 20 feet apart because you can't kill them unless you go to them one at a time. This very easily allows you to get dopamine from big Vortex balls almost all the time. Now for the final build, I have AOEban. AOEban is a very fun and a very high input build. You're constantly spamming abilities for your survivability because you're shield gating with catalyzing shields and brief respite. You have Arcane Aegis on here as well because 12 seconds of invulnerability is really good. Your efficiency is at a really good margin as well. So you're more capable of spamming out abilities without having to worry about your energy consumption. And honestly, it's just a really fun build to play. The low duration allows you to spam out your vortexes, which will grab all the enemies, bring them in the center, and just disappear without bothering the movement of the enemies still coming towards you. You don't have to worry about enemies getting stuck because of all the vortexes you're going to be spamming around. I have Theros Strike on here. Theros Strike allows you to 100% strip defenses. This includes shields along with armor. Once you reach the margin of 200% power strength, you're set. You're good. So the pattern for the build is fairly simple. Vortex a bunch of enemies, slap them with Theros Strike, and throw a Photon Strike onto them. They die. It doesn't matter if it's blast damage. You have scaling blast damage. And if they're not dead, throw another. You can. It's a spam build. That's what's great about this build. No matter what you're fighting, they will die. If you're running around, playing this build properly, spamming your abilities, and having your shields constantly regained for you, you're practically invincible. This build is probably the better build to take into disruption missions because Theros Strike is just a faster armor shred compared to Bastille. And that's it. That's all the builds for Vauban. Now let's go over some gameplay tips and a little bit of a review on how to play Vauban. So Vauban is a very mobile frame. You can cast every single one of his abilities while moving. You can shoot and reload while casting almost every single one of his abilities except for his utility belt. Your Flechette Orb and your Vortex are affected by weapon buff abilities and by Warframe buff abilities. You are tankier than you think. You want to make sure that your Flechette Orbs are up in choke points and killing enemies. You can always recast them and replace them wherever you want. Bastille is your moving fortress. You can take that with you wherever you want, and the bonus armor you get is not a laughing matter either. That's 1000 armor, and if you have the right duration, 200% for 20 seconds, you have basically a free Arcane Guardian on you at all times. You also apply status procs that aren't typically used most of the time, primarily Magnetic Blast sometimes, but primarily Magnetic. Puncture, the status proc, got a buff as well, so your Flechette Orb is going to be dealing more damage too. A lot of people have forgotten about this, but Puncture, it stacks up to 5 times. Enemies that are affected by a Puncture proc deal 40% less damage, and then they subsequently deal 10% less damage for each stack. And Puncture gets up to 5 stacks, so that's 40% all the way to 80%. And in addition, it also increases your critical chance up to 25%. Each stack gives you 5%. That isn't an additive critical chance, but it does add a little bit more crit chance for your Flechette Orbs. Vauban is also a very flexible frame for whatever stats you want to put on him. He is greedy for duration, efficiency, range, and power strength, but you can also sacrifice either of them. Vauban is a very flexible frame with many choices. He's also one of the few frames that can throw down his abilities when an Acolyte shows up and just kill them without even shooting the Acolyte. All you have to do is just run around your Flechette Orbs. The Flechette Orbs will kill him. The Bastille will armor strip him. You don't have to worry about Acolytes at all, even violence. He can't turn off your abilities. That's also another thing to make note of as well. Vauban doesn't get affected by nullifiers the same way other Warframes do. The only thing nullifiers delete from him when he enters a nullifier bubble is the armor passive. The only way a nullifier can affect your abilities is if a nullifier bubble touches the ball itself. Don't forget, Flechette Orb can damage nullifier bubbles. Vauban is one of the few frames that doesn't give a shit about nullifiers at all. You also want to bring punch through weapons, explosive weapons, anything that just shreds through crowds. My personal favorites are the Felarks and the Boar Incarnate.
Congratulations! 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 Congratulations!
Congratulations. You did it. The end of the video. It's finally over. With that being said, here's the fashion frame. I'm only going to be showing my primary fashion. If anybody would like to know the other fashion, you can always ask, and I'll make sure to post it in some other video that's coming up. But other than that, thank you for watching. Please, like, subscribe, bell, comment, whatever, the whole lingo. I'd appreciate it if you guys could. I am planning on doing a lot more of this stuff. I'm planning on doing guides of Warframes that are just misunderstood and talked down upon a lot. I'm also planning on showing some builds that I've created and some builds that I personally enjoy playing. And who knows, maybe some artsy fartsy thing here and there, because sometimes you need a break from making a massive video like this. I know there was a lot of information in this video, and I wanted to make sure that I could put as much information about Vauban in it. I'm sure I probably have maybe a couple mistakes here and there, and even with those, I personally feel good sharing this information with y'all. Which brings me on to the last thing I want to say. Don't let tier lists tell you how good your Warframe is. A lot of people follow these tier lists and potentially trash talk a lot of Warframes without actually fully understanding how a Warframe works. And personally, I don't like that. I want to make sure that all the information a Warframe has is out there for people to know. Because sometimes it can be real confusing trying to find a lot of this information. There is Google, there's the wiki, but in the end, you can't find it all. And a whole lot of people out there are just not doing this. And a whole lot of underdog and underappreciated Warframes are out there just being made fun of and being told to be reworked and changed and all that stuff. Reworks are something that take time. They take a lot of effort for a rework to happen. Hell, even the latest rework that we got with Hydroid, that took time, and Pablo was scared to bring it out to us. They honestly fear reworking Warframes, that it's a bad idea to try and do that. But with the amount of positive feedback Hydroid got, I'm sure a lot of other Warframes that deserve reworks will get get reworks. And, you know, Vauban may be one of those Warframes that does need a rework, but he's not going to get one anytime soon. A whole lot of Warframes aren't. So I'd like to try and show y'all what you can do with the Warframe at the moment. There's no sense in just waiting for another big rework to come. So I hope y'all stick around and see what's to come, because if nobody else is going to defend these Warframes, then I'll just do it myself. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day. I'll catch y'all next time.